My apologies, friends on Facebook and YouTube. The transmission wasn't working, I just discovered. Now it is. Sorry. We are doing something here of profound importance. We are nourishing and comforting this body, this being, reducing stress, allowing the sympathetic nervous system to calm down, and the parasympathetic to fire up. We are calming our emotional reactivity, learning how to modulate emotion. We are opening the door in a safe way to previously unconscious thoughts, emotions, impulses. We are developing compassion for the person who sits here. The capacity to hold them in and their pain in kindness. We are clarifying the doors of perception so that when we look upon the world, we see with fewer projections, fewer fantasies. And we go deeper and deeper. On the way, we encounter the layers of astounding suffering in the world. Turns out we can't look away. We open to it all. And our hearts can't help but blossom in compassion. The wisdom mind begins to know what to do, how to act in the world, how to act in relationships, how to act in activity. Our aspirations of goodness can become real. Each breath invites us home. Each breath invites us to see the reality of our circumstances. I want to take a few moments to speak about Thich Nhat Hanh and then to read something that he wrote. He was a young monk in Vietnam at the time of what they call in Vietnam the American War. Jennifer and I had our honeymoon there a decade ago, and we discovered that for the most part the Vietnamese were incredibly welcome, the South Vietnamese particularly, were incredibly welcoming of us because, quote, the Americans tried to keep them free of communism. What they're really afraid, and who they're really afraid of, is the Chinese, because they have an ancient history of war with the Chinese. But that's not the point of this morning. So he was a young monk, and he founded what he called the Order of Interbeing. And there's some very interesting precepts. Maybe I should read them someday. The 14 precepts of the Order of Interbeing. And they refused to take a side, and so they were killed by the Viet Cong and by the soldiers of the South and the American people. And he survived. A lot of his friends were killed. And he moved to France, where I think he's still alive. He had a bad stroke. I'm not sure about that. But anyway, he founded a very flourishing community called Plum Village. And I have many friends who've been there. And he was very central in the Vietnamese peace talks, when finally some peace came to that country. But he wrote this, and I think it pertains very beautifully to our present circumstances. It's called, Please Call Me by My True Names. And I invite you to listen with your heart. Thich Nhat Hanh, Tay, as his students call him. After the Vietnam War, many people wrote to us in Plum Village. We received hundreds of letters each week from refugee camps in Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines. Hundreds every week. It was very painful to read them. But we had to be in contact. We tried our best to help, but the suffering was so enormous, and sometimes we became discouraged. It is said that half the boat people fleeing Vietnam died in the ocean. Only half arrived at the shores of Southeast Asia. There are many young girls, boat people, who were raped by sea pirates. Even though the United Nations and many countries tried to help the government of Thailand prevent that kind of piracy, sea pirates continued to inflict much suffering on the refugees. One day we received a letter telling us about a young girl on a small boat who was raped by a Thai pirate. She was only 12. When you first learn of something like that, you get angry at the pirate. You naturally take the side of the girl. As you look more deeply, you will see it differently. If you take the side of the little girl, then it's easy. You only have to take a gun and shoot the pirate. But we can't do that. In my meditation, I saw that if I had been born in the village of the pirate and raised in the same conditions as he was, I would now be the pirate. There is a great likelihood that I would become a pirate. I can't condemn myself so easily. In my meditation, I saw that many babies are being born along the Gulf of Siam, hundreds every day. And if we educators, social workers, politicians, and others do not do something about the situation, in 25 years, a number of them will become sea pirates. That is certain. If you or I were born today in those fishing villages, we might become sea pirates in 25 years. If you take a gun and shoot the pirate, you shoot all of us, because all of us are to some extent responsible for this state of affairs. After a long meditation, I wrote this poem. In it, there are 3 people: the 12-year-old girl, the pirate, and me. Can we look at each other and recognize ourselves in each other? The title of the poem is Please Call Me by My True Names, because I have so many names. When I hear one of these names, I have to say yes. Do not say that I'll depart tomorrow. Even today I am still arriving. Look deeply. Every second I am arriving to be a bud on a spring branch, to be a tiny bird with still fragile wings, learning to sing in my new nest, to be a caterpillar in the heart of a flower, to be a jewel hiding itself in a stone. I still arrive in order to laugh and to cry, to fear and to hope. The rhythm of my heart is the birth and death of all that are alive. I am the mayfly metamorphosing on the surface of the river, and I am the bird which, when spring comes, arrives in time to eat the mayfly. I am the frog swimming happily in the clear water of a pond, and I am the grass snake that silently feeds itself on the frog. I am the child in Uganda, all skin and bones, my legs as thin as bamboo sticks, and I am the arms merchant selling deadly weapons to Uganda. I am the 12-year-old girl, refugee on a small boat, who throws herself into the ocean after being raped by a sea pirate. And I am the pirate. My heart is not yet capable of seeing and loving. I am a member of the Politburo with plenty of power in my hands. And I am the man who has to pay his debt of blood to my people, dying slowly in a forced labor camp. My joy is like spring, so warm it makes flowers bloom all over the earth. My pain is like a river of tears, so vast it fills the 4 oceans. Please call me by my true names, so I can hear all of my cries and laughter at once, so I can see that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true names, so I can wake up, and so the door of my heart can be left open. The door of compassion. I will put this on my blog. You can find that by going to robertbeatty.com and then looking for blog. Please call me by my true names. One of the lessons that I've learned recently is how crucial it is that we leave nobody out. That we really not forget or deny the extraordinary suffering that's happening in the world. And that we not participate in the suffering that comes from denying any of it. There's a conversation I've had many times with meditators over the years. People start to meditate and they really want some relief, and then that starts happening, and they start feeling more at ease. Relationships improve, and they start noticing how much they're hurting themselves, how difficult the moods are, and the anxieties and so on. And then something happens about noticing the pain in the world. And then you start noticing that the checkout person at Fred Meyer is really depressed. Or you stop and talk to a homeless person in the street, or go in and buy them some food and bring it back out to them, and you realize the plight they're experiencing, which is horrendous. And a couple of years ago, after Christmas, I made a big soup. We have a large canner thing. And I made a soup that had about 6 chickens, and I went with a dear friend of mine who'd been homeless, and we gave away food on one particularly rainy night under the bridges downtown. So much mental illness. It was stunning. This one particular guy, I remember, he couldn't hold the cup. He was also strung out on some drugs. He couldn't hold the cup of hot soup on a cold night. So we start allowing ourselves to experience the suffering that's all around us, in us and around us. And we become more and more compassionate, more and more caring. And then we start burning out. Then we start having less time for our family, or we start getting hard, actually, sometimes happens. And so there's this conversation that I've had so many times is to practice deeply enough that we can feel and know that, and actually to practice deeply enough that we also have access to equanimity. Right? The Brahma Viharas, there's love, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. If we leave out the equanimity, a call to our sick mother at home can blow us completely out of the water, because we somehow think, as I did I guess maybe till she died, I really thought it was my job to rescue her from her suffering, her depression, her anger. So it's quite a thing to open to the suffering of the world, and a central part of our practice. To see it, to know it, and to move toward it, and to be really as useful as we possibly can be. To be as powerful as we can in the face of oppression, violence. Maybe sometimes to put our life on, not very many times in a lifetime, one hopes, but sometimes it does take putting one's life on the line to stand up against oppression and violence. And how to maintain equanimity. How to practice in the way that Thich Nhat Hanh is speaking here, going deep enough so that we actually can hold all beings in our hearts. Quite a task. So that's what I wanted to share. I want to not do announcement-y things today at all. And I invite any sharing that you'd like to do, please.
Robert, it's Alicia.
Hang on. I can hear you just sort of. Try again.
Hi.
Hello.
Good morning. Good morning, Sangha. I just want to say that if in hearing that poem being read, and if we're invoking it in the context of our current circumstances, I want to say that if I were, say, practicing in the presence of the sea pirate and the little girl, the 12-year-old girl, my practice would be to hold the 12-year-old girl very close to me.
Absolutely.
Because she has experienced a terrible harm.
Absolutely.
And my practice would not be to cast out the sea pirate from my heart, but I would hold him at a distance in that moment, and I would center the experience of the person who is actively being harmed, and I would give tremendous nourishment to that person, while also hoping and practicing such that the person who's perpetrated the harm understands and is able to take accountability for it.
Elegantly put.
There's a proximity of how we even practice equanimity, I would say.
That's a beautiful clarification. Thank you. I was thinking actually more that the sea pirate might be handcuffed and be required to witness the love coming to the child, so that the actually this is a silly thing to remember, but you remember Timothy McVeigh? He's the fellow who killed all those people in Oklahoma City with the bomb. They put him to death. I would rather that he had been 6 days a week available to the families that had lost children and that had lost loved ones, hundreds of people, and that he had been required to listen to their pain with a distant possible hope of him waking up. It was such a shortcut. It was such a shortcutting of the process to put him to death. So I agree with you 150%.
But I guess what I'm saying is, I wouldn't be talking as much about the sea captain. I would be talking more about the 12-year-old girl. And making her the center of my concern.
Well, I guess I'm not in the presence of right now. And what I'm attempting to do is to teach a mode of spiritual practice which actually takes us deeper and deeper into ourselves, where we can see no distinction. And then from that capacity of seeing no distinction, then taking the skillful action that you're talking about. But my aspiration is really to see no distinction, but then to be very skillful in the world. And somebody gets shackled and somebody gets comforted. And then the shackled person also gets comforted when there's safety for everybody else. But here, this is a meditation group. And my intention is to share this thousands of year old model. How do we find profound compassion and act really skillfully? And it's hard not to pull the trigger and blow the pirate out of the boat. It's very deep in us to want it done. And that's the instinctive approach. And so we're kind of bucking the stream, but I don't in any way disagree with the importance to comfort and pay attention to, and well, and to do I thought it was beautiful the way Thich Nhat Hanh spoke about we need to be working in those villages now so that we can have fewer sea pirates, so that we take care of everybody all the way along. Which is, all the whole thing about taking care of people from birth to death and being more generous and having, we get into the realm of policy, early childhood education and et cetera, et cetera. But this gathering is not about policy. It's about how do we meditate in such a way as to become very effective in the merciful work we get to do in the world. So I think I'm on the same page with you.
Well, thank you for that. I'm struggling to reconcile different things within this practice of Buddhism. But I would say that what we're doing here isn't only meditating, and that we are held together in a community of interaction as well with people who have very specific experiences that we're trying to honor. And yeah, I guess I want to call that into our thinking, that it isn't what we're doing is meditating and practicing in real life.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense to me as a community, and I understand my role, since I can't do everything, is I would like everybody in this meeting this morning, and everybody that ever comes to PIMC, to have a true experience of anatta, of non-separation, so that from that moment forward, we can't not see with compassion and see what's happening. And I believe that takes a lot of dedication in practice to develop a consciousness that's stable enough to not get reactive and to not act on prior conditioning or on the emotion of the moment. And so the intention of my intention in my teaching is to empower people to really be profoundly human and capable of facing the most difficult circumstances without resorting to violence, without resorting to throwing anybody out of the boat. And so that's the piece I focus on, and I always will. I come from the lineage of Uba Khin and Ruth Denison, and a lineage in which awakening is understood to be possible, and that awakening then can lead to profound and effective action in many spheres. So you're carrying the torch for the action side in a way, and I want to be as absolutely supportive as I can. And that will not be my emphasis. I discovered 25 or 30 years ago that something happens to me, something comes through me, particularly when I teach retreats, and people experience profound transformative experiences. Life issues they've worked with for 10 or 15 years evaporate, and and the hearts blow open and things like that, and melt open, better word, and that means that my emphasis is taking people away from their engagement in the world into withdrawal. And there's this pattern of withdrawal and return, which is true of the Buddha, is true of Jesus. One thing we can as humans do is withdraw from activity and go deep inside, and then come back capable of actions and seeing and being in ways we never dreamed of, because we took the time to go deeply inside. And they're not in opposition to each other. They are totally, the left and right hand wash. We need both to wash each other. So I applaud you for the emphasis that you're having in your life. It's really an important thing. It's an important thing for PIMC. And we have been supportive of that initiative at PIMC too, and we're going to grow into it. We are growing into it.
Thank you. I will own that I can feel lost in the teaching sometimes, and that my touchstone always has to be understanding my practice and the point of it, I guess, through my relationship to the other people who are doing it with me. So I suppose in that way I really elevate the Sangha as the source of understanding and learning what it is that we're about. So anyway, I will stop there, but I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it, because it's very important for me to understand how I'm aligned with others.
Well, I'm willing to stop, and I'm also delighted to have this conversation. I think it's a really important conversation, and
I'm going to stop there myself and allow others to speak. But thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I wasn't trying to talk you into talking more, but it's very helpful. It's helpful to have. Well, this is anyway. Enough. I will stop there too and see what else somebody else wants to say.
I'd like to say something.
Hello, Leanne.
Hello. I think in order to go into those places of deep that you spoke of, that I totally believe people reach in meditation and in retreats and things, you have to feel safe. You have to feel understood, and this particular teaching for me came before I ever encountered Buddhism, in Catholicism, about understanding the oppressor, how we all came to where we are because of our circumstances in life. And I was, in fact, not told directly, but illustrated a story as a child, as a girl, that if you were being raped, you should say, Jesus loves you, Jesus loves you. I mean, that there is this orientation to understanding. And I've had these arguments, conversations over the years, many years, about pedophiles, just like the whole concept of how any of us turn off our hearts and become oppressors and live inside systems where we're oppressors and we're not even aware of it. And it feels to me like if I had brought up that this point about how that I think Thich Nhat Hanh makes beautifully, I just think that those of us who have that orientation, who've trained that way, who deeply, deeply believe that all people are inherently good and would not oppress if their hearts hadn't been closed and their peoples and their histories hadn't made them who they are. But when you live inside the role of having been oppressed, and if you'd made that point here, if Tempest were here today, I would feel like that story would just be really painful to hear. And that's what I'm concerned about, that we can't have a community of understanding, a community of people who reach the Dharma and who reach the teachings and the teachings reach them, if we can't understand that certain orientations are, that there could be people here today who are going to walk away and say, I can't do this in this context where it's not understood somehow. So it's really hard, Robert, because I feel like what you do is so beautiful and amazing and supportive and awesome. And I just want to support you. And I believe in supporting leaders and not walking away. But it's a tough story for me to hear this morning. As much as I love Thich Nhat Hanh and this story, it's like, whoa. The wheels, when you start to say it, just really started spinning for me. So it's hard stuff, but I think there's an issue with this kind of stepping into the eyes or the roles or the heart of people who cause harm and offering them our hearts, even though I totally believe it. Like, there's some part of me that's like right there.
Hang on just a second. I have a dog barking.
Yes, sure. And I think maybe.
There. They're sorry. Oh, I hear you, my dear. I was raised to be powerless, to not fight back. I had bullies, and I had bullies. They had me for a long time. It was awful. And it took me the longest time in my life to discover that I could be angry, even, that I could defend myself. And I certainly don't intend to teach that we should condone violence or that we shouldn't stand up against oppression and I also I have a certain degree of understanding of the Dharma. And I've had glimpses of the depths and the freedom and the love and the compassion and the power that come from that, the fearlessness that can come from that. And so it seems to me like I have a responsibility to teach that. But there's a problem when there's no... Anybody could tune into this morning who maybe somebody who'd never meditated before, or someone who has a very severe trauma background. And all of a sudden, then what I say could be very triggering. And how to filter what I say is a question, given that I'm a representative of this ancient tradition that holds this poem by Thich Nhat Hanh as really an important truth. So it's an awkward spot to be in. There are some teachings which it's inappropriate for people to hear, or it's too early for them to hear, or and especially with a broadcast, how does one And trauma's real. I've had a bit of trauma in my own life and been totally blind to it. And then bam, all of a sudden I'm so reactive to something that who knew? And I think you're old enough that this may make sense. Dominus vobiscum. Did you have the Latin Mass?
For a few years.
Yeah. And that was a pretty oppressive system to be in. I was in the Catholic schools. In Quebec, there were the Catholic schools and the Protestant schools. And my mother was Catholic and my father was Protestant. And the Catholic Women's League discovered that my father's company, the company he worked for, sold Batman comics and Playboy. And the worst of the two was Batman comics, because they were the dark side. And it turned out that I was getting, the brothers were giving me the strap, as it was called, this black thing. I'd have to hold my hands out and they would beat the shit out of my hands. And it turned out that it was because my father sold smut. That was a pretty oppressive system. Really crushed me, actually. So I'm not quite sure how to hold this other than to be as honest as I can and to be open to dialogue. I hope you don't go away. You may have heard me say this before. I wish we all had a balloon over our heads that revealed exactly what we were thinking and feeling. Because I have a supposition with that, which is that the only thing we could do would be to weep. And that's true with every human being. If we could see how they are, and the depth of the wounding, it would be the opposite of Facebook, the opposite of, this is my fantastic lunch I had today. But instead of that, it would be, these are the horrors I've gone through in my life, and this is how I am. Will you love me? Will you protect me? So in case it's not obvious, I really value this conversation.
Good morning, Robert. Good morning, Sangha.
It's Joe and Sky.
I want to share this with everyone here. Take great pride in choosing the path that you've chosen. It is not easy, and it is not for weak people to take this path. This is the hardest path to take, the one of nonviolence and understanding and love, especially in the face of the shallow and quick responses of hate and judgment. When you question yourself and your place in the world, in the circumstances that we find ourselves in, it is not easy. And to go into your heart and find the love that is there is not easy to find at times, but it is the honorable path. But no one should ever believe that it is the easy path, because it is not. That's why it's so hard to sit sometimes and find compassion and love for others. But it's because of the experiences of all of us. When I see the love in all these faces at times, they give me the strength to look at someone who is verbally abusing me in a lifetime circumstance and look for the good in that person. Or to look into my heart and into my past and forgive a bully that I've carried with me all my life. So I just want to share that with you and say that I'm proud that all of you have chosen the hard path. And I'm glad to be walking with you. And it's a slow path for me. So be patient. And bless you all for being here today.
Thanks, Joe.
Hi, Robert. It's Tim.
It's Tim.
Tim B. Regarding skillful action, my sense is that if I was on the boat and I had an opportunity to push the sea captain into the ocean the pirate, as he was approaching the girl to rape, that would be the skillful thing to do. Can we all agree on that? I mean, there's stories about very enlightened people who have talked violent people out of violence, which I totally support if there was time for that. But in that circumstance, my tendency would be if I was able to, I'd push the guy over the into the water. Just as if I encountered somebody committing violence on a city street, and I was 30 years younger, if I felt like I could intervene and stop that violence, that would be the skillful thing to do. What are your thoughts on that?
When you talk about that, I remember that this would be emotional for me. Those two guys that were killed on the train on the Max here in Portland, and I would have been one of them if I'd been on that train. There's this psychopathic guy who was looking for a battle, berating two young women, and I would have stood up. And if I had the capacity to take him down, I would. So, it's it's a big one for me too. What would I do with a magic?
That's helpful clarification. That's what I expected, but it's good to hear you affirm it. Thank you.
And I've wondered, what would I do in a shooting situation? And it may be a fantasy, but I think my impulse would be to go toward the shooter. I'm 73. I've had a good run. And is there any way that I could possibly, have these fantasies? Well, it does take a little while to reload, and I could possibly get there. And might be insane. The PIMC leadership attended an active shooter training in Portland, that all the churches and synagogues and people came, and the guy said there are those people who in the moment of that turn out to be willing to defend. But he said the most sensible thing is run. But it's an interesting dilemma, and who knows if we'll be faced with it. I've thought of that. Actually, I have a fairly significant pepper gel device that is in my purse. And my fantasy is that if I am in such a circumstance, I will take someone down with gel, and not hang around and fantasize, but do something. So I'm not completely into, by any means, don't intervene. But then there's the question, where do we intervene and how? And there's how do we take our practice, our practice of withdrawal and strengthening, and how do we then return with it with power? And we'll see. Thanks.
Robert.
I hear a voice.
It's Janine, but I don't have my camera on. Let me see if I can.
Hello, Janine. I
maybe
see
I
you.
can get
There
on
you
there.
are. Hi.
So, hi. I guess I'm struggling with some of this because we've kind of been focusing on individual behavior, which I understand, and capacity to love or to intervene and what's right or wrong. But I also think that part of what Tempest is reminding us of is there's this systematic piece to racism and the white supremacy culture that we live in, which is so much bigger than individual behaviors. And I think that's a lens that we have to look through when we deal with these issues. And I admit that I'm really new to the Dharma, so I pretend no enlightenment about that piece of it. But I do want to say that I think it's so easy to get focused on individual stuff when, in fact, I think part of what Tempest is calling us to as a community is to understand that we're caught up in this system as well, and to look at the ways that the system itself causes us to respond in the ways that we do. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I just don't want to lose that piece.
That makes total sense to me, Janine, and that I will rely on different minds than mine to clarify and help me understand that better so that I can act differently. But that's a crucial perspective.
Yeah.
Hey, Robert, this is Vic.
It's Vic. You are brightly orange, sir.
Yeah, it's fluorescent red. I've been pretty silent and quiet about this as the the token brown guy in the group here. A couple of thoughts coming to mind. I did propose a suggestion over email about, making this broader. It takes a lot of time and effort, like you acknowledge, and I wanted to offer that to you, saying, let this not weigh on your shoulders more than it has to. There are a lot of responsibilities on you, and it is a good thing to get some help. I think because there are systematic ways of thinking about this.
Let me just say, your letter has been very helpful already. It's already been a point of conversation among the board members and the teachers, and you'll hear more. But thank you. It was very, very clear-headed, and it was a relief to me to read it.
I appreciate it. That was the intention, so I'm glad it came out that way.
Yeah.
I come to PIMC because it teaches me about insight meditation. I don't come to PIMC because it's a social justice organization. There are other social justice organizations that are out there. I'm also very passionate about old growth forests, environmental conservation, but I don't expect PIMC to do that for me. I have a different organization that I go to for that, but I do try to bridge that and bring them in. When I read Tempest's letter, there were two separate issues that seemed to come out to me. One of them was something that a Sangha member said, and I actually know who that Sangha member is. I heard that, and I had a very similar reaction that Tempest did about why are people destroying our fair city when they can protest more nonviolently? That was said by a Sangha member. I personally disagree with that Sangha member. I agree with Tempest. And I think, but in some ways, there's not a whole lot I think the leaders can do about Sangha members expressing their opinion. They can say, well, maybe that's not the right thing to do or say. So there's an interesting situation about what is the leader's responsibilities when the Sangha members say something. I think there's maybe something that needs to be said there. The other aspect is how do the leaders teach metta? How do the leaders teach non-self? And like I said, and I'm coming to this to understand insight meditation, and I would be very disappointed if the organization stopped teaching metta and stopped teaching non-self, because I'm beginning to get little glimpses that these are very useful things to have. But I like one of the analogies that you've used, Robert, about going to the gym and lifting weights. It's a process of strengthening your muscle. But if I'm just starting out my bench pressing routine, I may not want to bench press 300 pounds. I may want to start with something lesser. And so when I'm learning metta, it may be very hard for me to bench press a raping sea pirate. It might be easier for me to bench press somebody who forgets to pick up their dog food when they're out on walk.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe we can eventually, build up to the raping sea pirates and the QAnon folks and people who are actively trying to kill and maim our less fortunate brothers and sisters. And so I don't know if that's an option for us to kind of think about how we build up to that metta practice. And we don't want to bench press 300 pounds, but maybe we don't start. That's all I want to say.
Thank you, Vic. That's yes, and that illuminates one of the dilemmas of being a Dharma teacher in a large community. And actually, Ruth Dennison talked to me about this 35 years ago. That when you're giving a Dharma talk, Robert, remember that there are people for whom this is totally new, and there are people who've been practicing for 15 years and have something there for everybody. And so my emphasis, my intentional emphasis is to stay more toward the beginner, the early practice in certainly my public teaching. But I also, it's hard to know how to, it may be impossible to have the right, I like your bench press analogy, by the way. I hear you, and it's a dilemma.
Robert, one of the things I take from your teachings and things that you've said, and I think comes up in the hypotheticals with the sea pirate and all of that, is I don't think it's a question of acting to prevent the harm. The question is, I think the skillful action is to use that amount of force or effort necessary to prevent the harm, but no more if possible. if tossing the sea captor or sea pirate out of the boat is the only viable option, then sure. But once the boat is secured, do you bring him back on board under circumstances where he's separated from the person that he's harmed, that he's bound or whatever? Or do you eviscerate him, leave him to drown, hang him up as an example, vent your anger and rage on him, which is exactly the conversation we're having about policing in this country. We have these police officers, many police officers out there acting out of their personal angers, traumas, biases, including racism, not just racism, but absolutely including racism. And they're not being trained to only use that amount of force necessary to stop the situation. It doesn't take 9 minutes of a knee on a neck to do that. And that's part of the skillful, that's part of what I hear in your teaching, which is this person continues to be a being and yes, needs to be prevented from causing harm, but that's the only focus, I think, or maybe not the only, but in that situation. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's how I interpret what you're talking about.
How to be skillful in the circumstances, really, the issue. I'm reminded of an interview that was done some years ago by a young American guy who was a black belt in a variety of things, and he was one of the Dalai Lama's American bodyguards. The Dalai Lama travels with a bubble of security around him, and he has his Tibetan security guards, and he has his Americans, and then the Secret Service, and then the police. It's this whole thing that happens. I've been at a couple of conferences where he's come to talk to teachers, and there was an interview anyway with this young American guy, young, probably 40, and the interviewer said, "Would you harm someone in order to protect His Holiness?" And he said, "Well, of course." "And would you kill someone if you needed to?" And he said, "Well, most certainly, and I would do it with as little rancor as possible." So it's the diminution of harm and the willingness to stop violence, evil. And that's a dramatic example, but how is it that I go through the world? I was talking to a friend about this conversation that we're having here at PIMC yesterday, and I shared with him my experience. I went down several times to the demonstrations at the courthouse, and the most, and I had one really incredible conversation with a Black Lives Matter leader, who he pointed over at the courthouse where the violence happened every night, and he said, "Don't even go over there. That's not what we're doing here. We're not interested in that violence. If we could stop it, we would." So I had this really nice conversation with him, and then I went and my back was hurting, and I sat down on a park bench. And there was an African-American man sitting to my right, a little younger than me, I think. And I asked him, "Do you mind if I sit down?" He said, and he welcomed me. Well, we wound up holding hands and crying together. And at the very end of the conversation, he said, "I don't want to ruin this nice connection, but I am homeless. Can you help me?" And I said, "Well, I can empty my wallet." And we had some laughter about that. And for me, that was the most important thing that happened in all the times I went down there. Because we met across the divide as human beings, and it was very touching to me.
I remember you telling that story.
It was very beautiful.
And just to share another personal truth, if I haven't said it already, I was trained to be an abuser. I was groomed, I was trained to be an abuser, and it's only because of the grace of my circumstances that I haven't done more in my life than I have. And a lot of my work is getting is understanding and absorbing and reconciling and finding out who this Buddha being is that's accompanied me through this existence. But in looking at the big meta picture of the world, I've gone back to the Bible and I've read about the Old Testament God. And if you actually sit and think about who that Old Testament God, the core of so many religions in our world, he was horrible. It took the invention of Jesus Christ. Yeah, well, it took the invention of Jesus Christ to somehow intercede. I mean, he had to kill his own son so that the rest of us could live with this dude. And, I came out of some realization that, God should be asking us for permission. He's up there saying, "Oh, hey, what have I done?" So much is how we raise men in this world, which incorporates women as well. And I don't know. That's sort of where I'm living right now.
Thanks, David.
So anyway.
Yeah. Thank you. I am going to need to go soon. I'm going to go visit my old mentor, Don Nickerson, who's 94. And I need to go fairly soon to do that. Hard to pull away from this conversation. It's pretty rich. Pretty rich. It's remarkable. So, anything else before we go?
Robert?
It's Tim.
I have a really short thing. Kind of comes at this from the other end. And it's something that Eugene Debs said. I don't know how many people are familiar with Eugene Debs, who was a great socialist union organizer in early part of the 20th century. A big hero of mine. And he spent a lot of time in and out of jail. And one of the things he said, sort of advice to young militants, he said you should try to arrange things to where you spend a little time in jail at least once a year, or twice a year, frequently. Because in order to continue doing the work, which is so hard, you have to have a break, you have to have time for contemplation and reflection to keep yourself from burning out.
I love it.
To keep yourself from burning out and to keep yourself on track, to give yourself a chance to review and think, so that when you do act skillfully, effectively, intelligently. Yeah, I thought that was a useful thing from the other end.
Well, it's a difficult way to get a retreat.
Well, for a guy in his position, he was very well known. He was a great leader in the movement. It was the only way he could get a break. It was the only way he could. It was the only way he could do it. Yeah. Plus, it's just part of his work anyway. He ended up in there. An interesting thing about him, by the side, is he ran for president of the United States on the Socialist Party ticket and got 1 million votes. This is somewhere in the early 1930s from a jail cell in Oklahoma. He ran for president from a jail cell in Oklahoma and got 1 million votes.
Wow. Thanks. Well, how are you feeling? What's the emotional tone right now? Can we open to it? Where does it exist? Does it exist in the body? What are the thoughts associated with it? Thank you, everybody, for participating and sharing. And I think we can all do some, I know I can, some really good growing up and acknowledging different perspectives and recognizing that we're all brailing our way. We're all trying to figure out how to make sense of this and also to really, I'm doing this routinely, which is to notice my reactivities when there's like a inside. That's important. Because otherwise, I wouldn't see it otherwise, other than through interaction. So, I think let's Om our way out again this morning. How about that? So please unmute if you wish. Today's Friday. I will not be here tomorrow. I will be on at 10 o'clock on Sunday. I think this is, no, last Sunday was Candle Sunday. I forget. But anyway, I'll look forward to seeing you Monday morning. And may you be safe. May you be protected. And may all beings be protected and safe. So let's Om. Thank you once again, everyone, for sharing and for being present. And may all beings be free from all forms of suffering. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Hey, Robert. Bless you.
A voice.
It's Tamara.
Hello,
Are
Tamara.
you still there? Are you still there?
I'm here. Are you there?
I am here too. I just wanted to say thank you so much for bringing up Sweet Nahan. I think he did kind of go on his way in October.
Did he?
So I believe so. So I just on a lighter note, I just wanted to say this is kind of a weird out of the box thing, but go look up on your Piglet and Pooh little quote that you read to us a while ago. Do you remember that one?
Oh, it's very dear to my heart.
Yes, you go home tonight and just, when we have blustery days, know that your friends are there. Go look up that one tonight and read it out loud to yourself, okay?
Oh, I know it. Piglet sidled up to Pooh and said, "Pooh? What?" said Pooh. "Oh, nothing. I just wanted to be sure of you."
That's right.
For those of us with insecure attachment, that's a very helpful reminder to the little kid. I just wanted to be sure of you.
Yes, that's right. And for those without insecure attachment as well.
That's probably true. Maybe that's normal for humans. Bye-bye.
I don't know if I heard incorrectly, but Thich Nhat Hanh is still alive.
No way. Are you serious?
Yes.
Oh, wow. I read that he died in October in Vietnam, And he had gone back to Vietnam, and then he went on his way and started to refuse medicine. But if he's still alive, that's amazing. Wow.
Easy to
Yeah,
check.
I did read in October that he was refusing food and treatment, and I guess that's happened several times since his stroke. But I have faith that the world would be informed if he was no longer with us.
Right.
So